Okay, today we have two guests, two of my favorites, Jamie Raskin and Khanna. Thank you guys both for coming back on.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be on.
So now you both are progressives. I think you've been especially instructive in showing that progressives aren't some fringe group in the Democratic Party in the same way that the Freedom Caucus is a fringe group on the right. The progressive caucus is pragmatic and effective and functional. Now you both served as go-betweens for the White House and the Congressional Progressive Caucus during infrastructure negotiations and Build Back Better negotiations. And now you're working to help the Congressional Progressive Caucus push its newly released executive action agenda. Can you speak on what that entails?
I could start. I remember Jamie in one of the progressive movement meetings at the critical moment saying, we're progressives, but we're also Democrats. And the threat is authoritarianism. And we have to recognize what we're up against. And so I think both of us and many progressives believe that we're there to get things done, to build a vision. On the other side, where you're talking about the Freedom Caucus, it's to tear things down explicitly. I mean, their vision is no government. We want actually much more of a role of government helping people. Now, our vision ideally perhaps goes beyond, in certain cases, what currently is happening. But that doesn't mean that we don't take the wins where we can get them. And I was really proud of the role the Progressive Caucus played in shaping the president's commitment on climate, on childcare, on bills to raise the wage, and of course the wins we got in the infrastructure bill.
I like what Ro just said about the difference between us and the Freedom Caucus. I mean, they're reactionaries. They want to go backwards, and the heart of the word progressive is progress. We want to make progress. And so if you look at what happens at hearings or markup sessions in Congress, you have the Democrats, I think, fueled by a lot of progressive ideas and energy, sitting down, trying to address problems in the country. And then what we get from the right is just a bunch of diatribes and polemics where they're just screaming about something. They've picked on something to be their talking point of the day, but there's no attempt to identify and solve the problems of the country. So I'm proud of the role that we played in delivering on infrastructure, a $1.9 trillion plan to invest in the bridges and the roads and the highways and the rail and the ports and the airports and broadband and so on. But we, of course, have a lot more to do, and we're fighting for the Build Back Better program and all of the components in it, the investment in universal pre-K, so the 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds at that critical moment in cognitive development get the investment they need, trying to lower prescription drug prices by giving the government the power to negotiate with big pharma for lower prescription drug prices, which is a power we've got in Medicaid and we got it in VA. We just don't have it in the Medicare program because Billy Townsend, when he was chair of the committee, slipped in a rider and then went off the next year and became president of Big Pharma.
What is the Congressional Progressive Caucus doing with regard to the executive action agenda? Is that related to what Joe Biden will have to do?
Yeah. So the executive action agenda is saying, all right, we were stymied in terms of being able to pass the complete Build Back Better package that the Democratic caucus wanted and that we were fighting for on the House side. So let's see what can be done through executive action on a whole host of things, from declaring a climate emergency and realigning a lot of government action to try to promote renewable energy and to develop far more effective executive action on climate, to things that could be done on the immigration front, since again, we are just kind of landlocked there by virtue of the filibuster and what's going on with the Senate. And you can understand our frustration because the House continues to act on all of the important questions of our time. I mean, take the For the People Act, where we would have gotten rid of partisan gerrymandering, moved all of the redistricting to independent panels. We would have protected early voting. We would have protected weekend voting. We would have protected mail-in balloting. And we get it through the House, and then it just collapses over on the Senate side because of the filibuster, which has turned the world's greatest deliberative body into the world's least deliberative body.
Do you have any indication as to whether Congress would move to cancel any student debt, for example? I know Congress and the White House have been tossing this back like a hot potato.
Sure. I mean, look, the president can take action unilaterally. And here's how you know he can do that. If you can suspend the payments, then certainly you can cancel some of the payments, and he ought to do it, even if it's $10,000. I know Senator Warren and Senator Schumer have said up to $50,000. He ought to take that measure, especially as you have young people struggling with higher rents, higher costs of buying a home, higher costs for daily life with gas and food prices. This is the time to act. The challenge in Congress, we can do it, but as you know, and as Jamie has just pointed out, I mean, you have the filibuster in the Senate, and I think people are tired of just the House passing something. Look at all the things the House has passed, and then in not passing in the Senate, and actually not making a difference in people's lives. So I hope he'll take that action.
One major item for progressives is the push to transition to renewables. And we're in an interesting moment here because we can see that our reliance on fossil fuels is betraying its weaknesses in every way, from the way that oil companies have screwed over American consumers, to the way that fossil fuels are funding petrostates and dictators like Vladimir Putin, to the way that it's destroying the planet. It was 70 degrees above normal in Antarctica last week. How are you approaching this issue in the House, and should we expect to see any movement on this issue of transitioning renewables?
Well, for one thing, Brian, I mean, I don't even consider it an issue. I consider climate change an emergency, and it's the prism through which we've got to view everything we're doing, whether it's transportation or housing or foreign policy or whatever. I mean, we are in an emergency. Like, the house is on fire, except the house is the planet, you know? And that was a remarkable day when you have both, the North Pole and the South Pole, essentially like the beach in Fort Lauderdale, you know. But we're dealing with repeated weather cataclysms all over the world, all over our country. We've got forest fires out of control in the West. We've got record drought through the Midwest. We've got record flooding in the East. We've got severe hurricanes of escalating velocity hitting the coastal regions. And so, if our brains work better, we would be working full time on this right now and mobilizing every aspect of government and public policy to be addressing the climate emergency that we're in. So we're going to continue to fight for everything that was part of Build Back Better, and we will try to make that happen on a standalone basis or through executive action, and keep pushing forward. I mean, I think we need to totally disengage from the carbon kings and the carbon barons and stop subsidizing big oil and big gas and big coal, and instead invest in the renewable energies that are going to be our salvation.
That was exactly my next question, is that U.S. taxpayers do give $20 billion in fossil fuel subsidies to these companies. How do we end those subsidies? And doesn't Congress have some say in how these subsidies are allocated?
We did an early hearing, Brian, where we had Greta Thunberg call for the ending of these subsidies, and we made a big push. Jamie and the Progressive Caucus were behind it to have the highest priority of ending subsidies, basically saying, let's have a level playing field. I mean, at the very least, don't give a handout to big oil. Don't give them an advantage in the marketplace. And we're continuing to push on that. I think we have two unique opportunities at this moment, and that is that a renewable energy agenda and taking on big oil now are both national security issues and economic issues. On a national security case, it's obvious that if you care about having petrostates like Russia, like Iran, like Venezuela, like Saudi Arabia, having less influence, the best way to do that is to have a new source of energy. If we just had more drilling here in the long term, that's not going to diminish the value of Russian oil or Venezuelan oil. The way to diminish the value of those states is to have a moonshot on renewable energy. I think people get that, and they understand long term we have to do that. The second thing is people are appalled at what's going on. While they're paying $6 in California at the pump, Exxon, Chevron, they look and they're making billions of dollars. They have $44 billion that they're giving back to shareholders or dividends. It's not that they're putting this money in for more drilling. They're not. Wall Street's telling them don't do that. And so they're making all these profits while people are paying the price at the pump. That's just not fair. And that's why I've pushed for, and many are supporting this windfall profit tax 50% of their profits and send a check back to the American people.
Now, we've got an election coming up in November. The obituaries have pretty much been written for the Democratic Party, in part due to Joe Biden's approval rating, in part due to a lot of the progressive agenda not passing. So how do you reconcile this issue where you acknowledge people's frustration at the Democrats while pressing the fact that the alternative is a party that, only days ago floated the idea that the court case legalizing interracial marriage was wrongly decided? This is a party that wants gay marriage and abortion and contraception on the chopping block. How do you approach this issue?
In Democracy in America, Tocqueville said that democracy and voting rights in America are either always shrinking and contracting, or they're expanding and moving forward. And we obviously need to get on the growth path. We're fighting for statehood for 713,000 disenfranchised people in the capital city in Washington, D.C. And the House passed statehood for D.C. The Senate didn't take it up, but we're fighting for statehood for D.C. We're fighting for statehood for Puerto Rico. We're fighting for universal voting rights, a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to vote. We want to move democracy forward, and they want to take it back. They want to dismantle democracy. I mean, if you want to see the Republicans' vision for the future, look at January 6th, because they have no platform. 2020 was a remarkable year for a lot of reasons. One of them was that it was the first time in modern political history when one of the political parties didn't pass a platform, and they went to their convention, they came back and they threw up their hands and they said, we don't have a platform, which tells you what? Their platform is whatever Donald Trump tells them it is. Meantime, what we get is constant voter suppression, which is their real agenda, and actual attempts to overthrow our constitutional processes and negate the result of a popular election. So, I understand people are frustrated by the filibuster. I'm frustrated by the filibuster. Roe's frustrated by the filibuster. But come on, we got to defend democracy such as it is in order to move democracy forward.
I want to focus on that issue, the issue of January 6th, just for a moment, and then go back. I have a bunch more questions about the state of the Progressive Party. But Jamie, you sit on the January 6th committee. Do you believe that Clarence Thomas should be recusing himself from cases involving January 6th, given his wife's participation, given what we now know from her text messages?
Well, first, we've got a structural problem that we have been trying to get Congress to address for a couple of years now, and to try to get the courts to address, which is that the Supreme Court justices are the only jurists in the land that have no system for defining whether or not they have a conflict of interest. It's totally up to them. So let's say it were to come out hypothetically that Ginni Thomas and Clarence Thomas were talking about overthrowing the election. It would present a clear conflict of interest. It would be up to Clarence Thomas to decide whether or not to recuse himself from January 6th related litigation, which cuts against the cardinal principle of American law that James Madison identified in the Federalist Papers, where he said, no man may be a judge in his own case. I mean, that is just so fundamental, So the structural problem is we got to figure out a real system that the Supreme Court will adopt, and require them to adopt a system for dealing with conflicts of interest, which is more than everybody do whatever they want. That's not how it works in the executive branch. That's not how it works in the House or the Senate. It's not how it works in any of the states. It shouldn't work like that in the Supreme Court. Then, as to the specifics of this case, assuming that system's not in place, should he recuse himself? Well, right now we've got a very strong appearance of a conflict of interest. We don't know if they've been in touch, of course, about all these issues, but Ginni Thomas said in that text that's been quoted, I haven't seen that text, by the way, but assuming that's correct, if she's saying that, she's in touch with her best friend about it, and that refers to her husband, and we know that they have referred to each other as their best friend in the past, then that's a real problem. If they have some kind of Chinese wall in their marriage where her insurrectionary and coup plotting activities have nothing to do with him, and he doesn't talk to her about it, and she doesn't talk to him about it, okay, then he wouldn't have to recuse himself. But that's a question of fact, and we don't have enough facts now to know.
On that point, do you think that she'll be called to testify for the committee?
But I can't say. All I will say is we've had more than 750 interviews, and we're interested in hearing from everybody who has information related to what happened on January 6th. And the overwhelming majority of people we've contacted have spoken to us in an interview or a deposition voluntarily. It's just the closer you get to Donald Trump, there are a dozen to 24 people who are refusing to speak, but hundreds and hundreds of other people with information are speaking. And just think how scandalous that is, that you have people who have served at high levels in government who will not speak to the Congress of the United States when we're asking for information about an attempted overthrow of our constitutional system.
One more question on this, and that is, you having served as an impeachment manager, you understand and appreciate the need for accountability for everyone all the way up to the top, including Donald Trump. We're now only a few months away from midterms. Are you optimistic that accountability for him is something that we will see? What do you say to your constituents, for example, who are eager to see some accountability and frustrated that we haven't thus far?
Well, there are different kinds of accountability, right? So Donald Trump's been impeached twice, and he was impeached by the House for inciting violent insurrection against the Union. And he also was found by 57 senators to 43 to be guilty of that. He beat the constitutional spread, as I like to say. We didn't get to 2/3, and yet we have concurrent, robust, bipartisan, bicameral majorities establishing as a parliamentary fact that he engaged in violent insurrection against the Union. The question of individual criminal culpability for him or anybody else who was involved is obviously up to the Department of Justice. And one of the things we want to rebuild is respect for the independence of the law enforcement function. So unlike Donald Trump, we're not going to try to dictate, and the President of the United States is not going to try to dictate to the Department of Justice where their investigation goes. I'm pleased to see that more than 750 cases have been initiated and indictments brought, and it looks to me like they're working their way up in like a typical mob prosecution as they work their way up from the lesser crimes like criminal trespass, assaulting an officer, all the way up to seditious conspiracy, which means conspiracy to overthrow the government. But there's another kind of accountability at stake here, which is constitutional accountability. And Section 3 of the 14th Amendment says that anybody who is sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States who violates the oath by engaging in insurrection or rebellion against the Union can never serve again in state or federal office. So I think that there is some burden on our committee, the January 6th Select Committee, to examine that provision and to make recommendations about what to do with that with respect to Donald Trump or anybody else who swore an oath of office and is now, in this constitutional gray zone defined by the radical Republicans in the 19th century. You can't serve again if you've engaged in insurrection or rebellion. The question is, how is it determined whether or not you've engaged in insurrection or rebellion? And then the other kind of accountability is just the macro political accountability that comes from congressional fact finding. We're going to give a report to America based on hearings that America can watch about what happened. And ultimately, in a democracy, the strongest form of accountability is the truth.
Now, you both especially have been able to work across the aisle to get legislation passed. And yet, the Republicans that you work with are the ones who are overwhelmingly stymieing your agenda, which has screwed progressives first and foremost. It's not like the moderates are the ones primarily getting screwed here. It's you and us. How do you reconcile working together and almost rewarding the people who obstruct you? Like, especially given the stakes. I mean, climate change, voting rights, Ukraine aid, these are life and death issues. These are existential issues. And I think the thing that's difficult for someone like me on the outside to reconcile is that we're mad, we're angry out here, and is it not difficult to reconcile working together with the people who are causing that anger?
I understand the anger. I mean, people have been voting for change in this country probably since 2004, since Howard Dean. And the part of the problem is, and the reason that the Democrats are in a tough situation, is that many people realize that the past 30, 40 years has not worked. Jobs have gone offshore. manufacturing has bled. The wealth is piling up in places like my district in Silicon Valley, and the working class has been hurt. And so they keep trying a new combination, saying, well, our life isn't improving. And that has led, and sometimes if the Democrats are in power, they say, well, let's just try something else. The problem is that the Republicans have actually done nothing to help the people who have been left out. And their entire platform, as Jamie pointed out, I mean, one of the things, if you look at every Republican speech, half of them start with, we're fighting for the American way of life. You know, that is exactly a quote from Strom Thurmond in 1948. He said, I'm fighting for the American way of life. The reason that they are conveniently okay with democracy being riding roughshod over it is that they think, in my view, that the preservation of American culture as they know it is more important than if they do damage here and there to democratic institutions. And so the stakes are really, do you believe America should become a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy or not? That is really the fight. Beyond that, then we ought to be honest and say, look, we understand we haven't fully delivered in making up for the last 30, 40 years of job flight and then the stagnation of the middle class and working class. Here's what we've done. Here's what we need to do. But by the way, we need more Democrats to do it, more progressive Democrats to do it. Putting in Republicans who are going to be opposed to America becoming a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy is not going to achieve that. And the final point on working together, you know, one of the things we work together on is the President's Competes Act. That is going to put $20 billion in Ohio. Intel is, the president recognized this at the State of the Union. That is more than Donald Trump did in 4 years for the quote unquote forgotten Americans or flyover country of the Midwest. Biden is delivering $20 billion, bringing semiconductor manufacturing back to the United States. Well, if we have to work with Republicans to get votes on that in a 60 Senate filibuster, then I think we have to do that. I'm not going to not help do things that are going to bring manufacturing back, that are going to raise wages, because it means working with Republicans.
Now, I know that you both have done a ton of media. Ro, I know you especially seek out media that's not only non-traditional, but oftentimes non-democratic too. What is the biggest misconception that people have about progressives? And what have you found is the most effective way to bridge both, moderate Democrats and Republicans with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party?
Either A, that the ideas are somehow radical, or B, that they are obstructionists. Let's talk about the radical part first. Medicare for all, single payer healthcare is something Ted Kennedy championed. It's something Jimmy Carter ran on. It's something Harry Truman was for. This has sort of been the dream of universal healthcare. It's a core democratic principle. It is the most democratic idea, and it's an idea that is mainstream. Having a livable wage. This is a core democratic principle. Having organizing and giving workers a fair shot in an economy. It's a core democratic principle. Having public education be free. That was a movement to have high school free. In a modern economy, we want to make sure that you can have vocational education or college. That's a core democratic principle. These are not ideas that are outside either the core democratic message, nor are they outside what most Americans want, and they're popular. And so what is a fair critique? The fair critique of progressives is, well, things that are popular, things that are core democratic constituencies, it's just too hard right now because of all the special interest money, because of all the lobbyists, because of all these arcane rules, and it's not practical. We've seen now that progressives, not only are we bold, but we're willing to compromise to get something over nothing. And that's another misconception. What legislation, I ask you, has not passed the House that the president wanted because of progressives? There isn't a single legislation that hasn't passed. And then there's the criticism on the left saying, well, you guys aren't standing up enough. But if you really have the view that we should just stand up for what is popular and what is ideal and not get the progress on the way, I just think that's not fair to the constituents who need whatever help we can have at this point.
Let's finish off with this. We have a president in Joe Biden who, although he has been, I think, a great and open partner for progressives, at his core, I do believe that he is a mainstream Democrat. a lot of progressive agenda items, are so popular, from a $15 minimum wage to lower drug prices to taxing the rich to combating climate change. And yet there's still this disconnect between the candidates who espouse those ideas and the ideas themselves. How did progressives bridge that gap and become as popular as their agenda items are?
Well, I think you've put your finger, Brian, on what a progressive is. I mean, the progressive positions historically advanced in the Democratic Party have become mainstream. Whether it's Social Security, it's Medicare, it's Medicaid, it's pro-choice, it's pro-marriage equality. These are things that were seen as just unthinkably radical and extreme when first advanced. Progressives the progressive Democrats are just like other Democrats, except they get there first in terms of where we need to move as a society. So, $15 minimum wage, I remember when that was a really radical position. It's just not a radical position anymore, but it was the progressives who were the ones who got there first and were advancing it. So I don't think of progressive in linear terms, like off to one side or the other. I think of it in sort of forward terms, like the people who stepped forward first. I remember on marriage equality, when I first announced I was running for the state Senate, which was the first thing I was running for, I announced everything I wanted to do on my announcement day. We wanted to abolish the death penalty in Maryland. We wanted to pass marriage equality. We wanted to decriminalize marijuana. We wanted tough anti-drunk driving laws. We wanted the toughest gun safety law in America. Anyway, I ran through everything. This woman came up to me. She goes, Jamie, great speech. I love your speech, but take out everything in there you've got about gay marriage, because this is in 2006. She said, it's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. Even the gay candidates don't talk about it. And it makes you sound like you're really extreme, like you're not in the political center. And I said, thank you for telling me that, because it makes me realize it's not my ambition to be in the political center, which blows around with the wind and the polls. It's my ambition to be in the moral center. It's our job as progressives to find what's right, the best that we can, and then bring the political center to us. And that's all that a progressive is. I mean, I don't think we can assert access to any superior knowledge or wisdom or virtue to anybody else. But when we start paying attention to things, we see where things have to go. And that's where universal health care is. I mean, it's just unfathomable to me that 50 years from now, we won't have national health care in the country. And even the Republicans will grudgingly accept it the way they grudgingly accept Social Security or Medicare today, and say stupid things like, government, keep your hands off my Medicare,
Right.
All of which is to say, we are progressives because we believe in progress. We are liberals because we believe in liberty. And these days, when you look at what's going on in the Republican Party, we're also the true conservatives because we want to conserve the land, the air, the water, the climate system, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, Social Security, Medicare, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. I mean, they just want to tear everything down. That's nihilism. That's not conservatism. So at this point, we've got one party of democracy. We represent all of the philosophical traditions.
Perfectly put, as always. Jamie and Ro, thank you guys both so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.